economy and contributing to the social development of our nation, and as well as the cultural exchanges that this comes with. We also acknowledge the fact that there remains an untapped potential waiting to be harnessed. And I guess one of these, or the reason for one of the sessions we're going to have, is to ensure that we can, harness that untapped potential within the diaspora community. This roundtable engagement is an exciting opportunity for us to discuss and explore the collective and foster deeper connections between the diaspora and West Africa, as well as skill investment, innovation, and collaboration to create sustainable growth. As one author said, it's great to do little. It's great to do more, and we can do more if we come together. And this is also aligned to the tagline of CalBank. We see that forward together, and we believe that as we work together, we can move forward together. One of the primary objectives of today is to facilitate a dialogue among the diaspora investment and partnership in Ghana and West Africa. And as we embark on this discussion, I'd like to encourage us to think of our own experiences, how these experiences and resources can contribute to the collective advancement of our country and of our region as a whole. Together, let's identify the key sectors of our investments that will empower our economy. And we stand as CalBank to say, once we identify some of these opportunities, we are willing to back it as a bank.
Words. And yet again, thank you, CalBank, for your unwavering support for the diaspora community. As you all know, we are gathered here tonight for the roundtable event. Ahaspora is a network of Ghanaians living abroad. However, they are committed in using their skills, knowledge, and resources to come back home and develop what we now know as our home country. So with that, the organization focuses on creating opportunities for engagement between the Ghanaian diaspora and local stakeholders, fostering communications and connections, and organizing events such as this. This type of event is created in order for everyone to hear about what is going on underground. It's also a chance to gain knowledge and also have people share their knowledge and also their resources with you guys. So now I think it's time for the much anticipated panel discussion. We are privileged to have the exceptional panel of representatives from organizations leading impactful work across Africa. They will be sharing their insights as well as their roles on how the diaspora has transformed in their development. Our distinguished panels include representatives from the Mastercard Foundation, Sterling Bank, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, Design and Technical Institute, and RightWay, all of which are from various parts of West Africa. This conversation will be moderated by our very own Christabel E. Darcy, founder and CEO of Ahaspora. We encourage you to engage with our panelists and share your thoughts during Q&A. Nothing is too small or too big to ask. Without further ado, please welcome on stage Christabel and our distinguished panel speakers.
Literally rule the world. What they saw hasn't happened yet, but we believe it is possible. And so, as we sit here, the question becomes, why do we think Africa and then stop thinking and think outside? Even with simple things like where we decide to go for vacation. I want to start with very practical things. So I'm going to ask a question to the audience. My question is, how many of you have been to an African country outside Ghana? Please, let's be truthful. How many people? Okay. Not that bad. All right. Not transit. Thank you. Yes, not transit. That's a good one. Okay, let's ask again. How many of you have been to more than 5 African countries? Okay. Africa's changes, right? I love it. Now, how many of you have been to more than 5 African countries for vacation? Not for work. So you see what is going on in this room. If you look around, the lovely thing is, to be honest, more people in this room have been to several African countries than I thought. So I'm already at peace with that. So tell me, one after the other, what your favorite African country is. Ozzy, because you are smiling at me.
It's going to be a phenomenal night. My favorite African country. I feel like that's sort of like how you ask your parents which one is your favorite child. You start having those conversations, it's problematic. So traveling is my refuge. So I've actually seen quite a bit of the world. I've been to about 20 African countries, a lot of it for vacation. But if you had to ask me what my favorite is, I think the place where I find peace would be Ghana. Every time I land on this soil, there's some peace that feels it. But I gotta give a shout out to my new adopted home though. You can't sleep on Nigeria. It's been such an amazing experience. So I would say Ghana and then Nigeria. Nigeria is really for the year.
We're gonna first talk about success because I believe that Africa is a success story. So I would like you to tell us how a young man like yourself decided to create a tech industry and you managed to work across Africa. What is the success story?
So I founded Whitecom 11 years ago, and there won't be a success story without West Africa. And the reason why I'm saying this is that Whitecom is a leading company in customer experience management on the continent. We do have coverage of about 30 countries. So we started in one single country, and that single country was Ghana. And Ghana being our first country, and I do have roots in Benin, and like you say, and that's for me, that's one of the pieces that we'll discuss. What can make us come together? I was born and raised in a francophone countries, but I found success in an anglophone country. So that's the very first thing, for people who want to go beyond the borders, to break things into pieces. You must be able to communicate. You must be able to understand different cultures, to embrace different cultures. And then I do speak 6 languages across the corridor, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. And then there's no better passport than understanding every single language when we cross the borders. So for me, starting from one country and being given the opportunity to grow my team across multiple countries, Cote d'Ivoire being our biggest francophone market in terms of revenue, Nigeria being our biggest anglophone market in terms of revenue, but then Benin is our biggest country in terms of headcount. So we are quite diverse. And then all those countries are in West Africa, even though we cover 30 countries. So there must be something about West Africa that we are not leveraging, and that's what's behind the success of Whitecom. I came to Ghana backpacking, and some 12 years ago, I didn't know any Ghanaian when I came here. But here we are today, the leading company in customer experience in Africa, and we must be proud of that. And there's so much to say how you can scale if you understand, cultures in countries where you have ambition to expand to, and then you leverage those assets and turn them into great stories.
Because my dad's job, working for the Commonwealth at that time, moved us to different countries. And so I left Ghana when I was 5, and I returned to Ghana when I was 18. But my family had lived in Botswana for almost 40 years. As a creative, having the opportunity to have lived in different countries and had seen different cultures exposed me very early on to what my classmates in university here didn't see. And so I came into a country that was so used to using adinkra symbols to do everything because that's what they saw. But I came in with a very different mindset. I had seen so much. I knew that creativity, usually for artists, comes from the environment you come from. And so very early, I was able to get very enviable jobs because I approached the arts with so much more creativity and innovation. And so in the last 25 years, I've run a company called Accent and Art that is the leading metal fabrication company. We've had the opportunity to work on projects that I never imagined just because we had that opportunity to have lived across different borders. And so I'm grateful for having that opportunity to have seen so much. And I think that's the thing. When we lived in Botswana, there was apartheid in South Africa at that time. And so we had to fly to Zimbabwe and Ghana Airways and then drive to Botswana. And so we lived across all that. I mean, we were in the Gambia in the 80s when the first coup happened. And so you can imagine as a young person seeing Africans from different angles really shapes your mind. And I think this is to the audience. There's so much wealth and so much to tap into that I would like to encourage you that any opportunities that you get, take a backpack and just travel. There's so much to see and to add value to your Africanness. So I think that for me was what shaped me.
I'm going to start by embellishing this conversation around the diaspora a little bit. I don't think that we're doing ourselves justice if we don't start by opening with the fact that the stories that we tell about people moving to other countries are highly exaggerated throughout the opportunities. And that the more of us that travel across our border to those countries, the more difficult the circumstances become. Either because there are so many of us there looking for the same job, or because there are so many of us there that those people start looking at us funny. In the same vein, the stories that we tell about the difficulties of being in Africa are also exaggerated. It is never really as bad as we make of it. And if we continue to tell these difficult stories and never balance the story, then we discourage those who would actually come the other way and thereby make it even better. Because the more diasporans that actually come home, the bigger the pie becomes. Because these are people with incredible experience that they can bring home. So let's always remember that when we tell the story. The second comment around diaspora, before I then talk about specific issues, is it's not just an economic conversation. Yes, it's fundamentally economics, but there is a spiritual conversation, there's a cultural conversation, there's also a political conversation. Because there's a political Africa, whether we like it or not. Until we start to think about our role in the world as a continent and how the diaspora actually fit into that, then we're not having a complete story. And we can't have a complete story for the diaspora unless we weave it around a cultural enterprise, around the fact that their soul would always be on this continent. And that this is probably the only place on earth where they will ever be at home. We have to tell that story.
So I moved back to Ghana in 2009 after about a decade working and schooling in the US. And I'm actually really glad that you're starting the conversation from a point of success, because I think that's absolutely important. As Abu said, we do a lot of work talking about the things that are not working, the negative things that we foresee. And I think the telecoms industry, just globally, has been cutting edge in moving the African continent forward. So when I moved back, the first company I worked with was Tigo, also known as Millicom. And I think what was, I would call success in that period from 2009 was just the fact that we were actually in a situation where these companies at that point were being run by foreigners. Millicom was a company that was from Latin America. And in about 2 to 3 years, we had managed to transition leadership from, a company that was being run almost entirely, the leadership was all foreigners, to a company that was now being run by Africans. And it didn't happen by chance. It happened because we made a consistent effort to bring in talent that was local, but also a lot of talent that came from the diaspora. So when I started working at Millicom, I was one of the first people who'd come from the diaspora. You all know Seloma Dadivo, former MTN CEO. He joined Millicom not too long afterwards. You might know Tinu Awuno. You might know Sharon Ejipong. You might know Annalisa Basmati. These were all people who had lived and worked abroad. And as they started to see the influx of people coming to the continent and working together to build something, I think there was that desire to join the force and really start figuring out how they could be part of that success story. In an industry that was already on its way up, we all know the background of Celtel and how that almost revolutionized mobile in Africa and helped us leapfrog. So that would be, I guess, one of the first things that I would call success in the telecom space from a very personal perspective. The fact that we were in a company that was run by Latin Americans, 90%, and in about 3 to 4 years, the leadership had become quite local. I think that was the first thing. I think the second thing for me from a telecoms perspective was from a price point. If you think about mobile today, the reason why people are able to communicate, the reason why mobile money happens, etc., is just because of the fact that it's now affordable. And that didn't happen by chance. The competition in the industry was actually very important in turning around the type of what was a very high-class industry at the beginning, where if you didn't have very significant funding, you couldn't even afford what they call the regional pointing and makers, these very big bricks or phones. And there was a concerted effort within the telecom industry on how can we actually bring down pricing so that it can be affordable to everyone. And true that I think from a very fundamental point, we were very profit driven. But we also realized that the more people who could have access, the more people who could talk, the more people who could communicate would actually open up and actually result in a space where there was actually a lot of profitability. So being able to come up with very creative and innovative products and promotions that would bring down the price so that everybody would have access to mobile phone. And the most interesting thing we got to was a point where we had 120% mobile penetration in this country.
Before I answer your question, I want to piggyback on Rosie's conversation that it also took an African to take a chance on Africa in the telecoms industry. That all the studies would have, were pointing to us never being able to afford this, and it wasn't a market that was viable, and this and that. But somebody decided to make that investment, and that has been a game changer on the continent. So now to Christabel's question. I don't know all the answers around challenges, but I think government creates that enabling environment for a lot of things that the private sector has to do and for the private sector to thrive. And I think in many circles, government is seen as the boogeyman, this bad person, this bad actor, and the people that we should be afraid of. But I think what we should be doing, there are two sides to this, and I think the first part is not just to go to policies and strategy. I want to take us all the way back to how we even get the government in the first place. And so before you complain, you have a responsibility. How many people in this room are over 18?
Pretty much everybody.
All right, pretty much everybody, which means you're responsible for the government you elect in Ghana. We're responsible for the government we elect in Sierra Leone, across West Africa. And I think we have choices, and that's where it starts, in terms of who we want to represent us. So not just the president and cabinet. It starts from your representatives. I'm sure a lot of people don't know who their local councillor is or who their MP is. They just voted for the party symbol. I wouldn't dwell on that, but that's where I believe that the problem starts. Now, when a particular group of people come into government, the expectations are high and everybody thinks that, okay, they have this magic bullet. They come into a structure and administration that also has a bureaucracy, which is the public sector. They stay. Nigerians will say, government come, government go. But then they can be, like, they remain, you know, and we haven't invested, I think, in a lot of our countries in that public sector reform, in the people who are really the engine for growth and development. There's a lot of focus on the executive and most often not the public service and the efficiency. And the countries that we see that are doing well are the ones where the public service is efficient. So I think that's where I want to touch on, Christabel, you know, that efficiency. So there are lots of ways, because, you know, these are the people who do the grunt work. A minister comes in, goes with his briefcase, people are clapping here and there, somebody writes speeches. I'm not saying they're not important, they're very important people, but there are people behind them that do the work. So I have found myself for many years in spaces where we do advisory work. Two senior officials. So it's about shaping and crafting the right strategies, the right policies, and the right reforms. So I think there's a space, because more often than not, everybody speaks to there not being enough people to do this work.